Well, an official good morning to you all, or good afternoon. It's just 12:02 now here in the Central Time Zone. So pleased to see you all, and so glad you could join us for this February 2nd issue of Iowa Quiltscape, virtual Iowa Quiltscape. My name is Megan Barrett, and I'm the director of the Iowa Quilt Museum, and I'm sitting here in the gallery of the Iowa Quilt Museum. And I'm guessing that we have several folks who are joining us today who are not terribly familiar with the Iowa Quilt Museum. So I'm just going to give you the 5-cent speech about who we are and what we do. We are a nonprofit private museum. We opened 5 years ago here in Winterset. And Winterset is just southwest of Des Moines in Iowa. We are in Madison County, and you may recognize Madison County from that book, movie, and musical called The Bridges of Madison County. That is us. We are the covered bridges of Madison County. Winterset is also the birthplace of John Wayne. And so there is a museum here dedicated to that. And now there's us, the Iowa Quilt Museum. And so we are located in an old storefront that for a very long time was a JCPenney building. We have this beautiful, long, narrow gallery with 14-foot ceilings. It's just the perfect place for us to be displaying beautiful textiles. And we do these rotating exhibits. We change exhibits 4 times a year, and we work with guest curators such as Linzee McCray. And Linzee has curated 3 exhibits for us so far. This is her 3rd, and it is titled String Theory, String Pieced Quilts from Past to Present. And we have 2 guests with us today who are contributors to this exhibit. Bonnie Hunter, who is the maker and designer and genius behind this quilt right here over my left shoulder. And Teddy Pruett, who is the owner of this quilt over my right shoulder, and she's going to tell us the story behind that as well. I chose this quilt, Teddy, because it's got the most fun story, I think, about it. So we are going to start out. I'm going to turn things over to Linzee for just a moment and ask her if she would please give us a little bit of insight into this exhibit and her thinking behind its creation. So Linzee, go for it.
Hi, thanks so much. It's wonderful to see so many people. And if you were here last time I spoke, I apologize because I'll probably repeat myself a little bit. But I've just always loved string piecing. I've taught string piecing, and I have written a book about feed sacks, and it sort of touches on the same things that I love about feed sacks, which are basically the strength and resilience of women. I love that so many string quilts, not all string piece quilts, are made from scraps. And often, you know, if you look at them, you think they're not made, they're not made according to a pattern. So I love that. There's that creativity. And also just the idea that people took what they had and made something with it. And sometimes it was beautiful, sometimes it wasn't. But as the exhibit shows, there are a lot of beautiful things with it. The other thing I really love about string piecing is it's such a versatile technique, and so many contemporary quilters like Bonnie have taken it and made it their own in beautiful and surprising ways. I think Megan is sitting in the perfect place in the exhibit to show too some of the really amazing quilts there. So that was sort of how I got the idea to pitch string piecing to the museum. And when Megan was talking about it, that building is so beautiful and shows off quilts so wonderfully. It just is a really exciting exhibit. Of course, I'm biased, but I think it's really wonderful. So that's sort of where the basic idea for it came from. And then I just went out and I searched. I used Roderick Kirikoff's book, Unconventional and Unexpected, to find quilts. I found Teddy through the American Quilt Study Group, who had many amazing string piece quilts. And Bonnie, I guess I knew about, and I was looking specifically for, I wanted to show as many settings as I could, and one of them was serpentine setting. And so I found the cover of Bonnie's book, and we started talking, and then she showed me these other amazing quilts. So I was thrilled to be able to include both of these folks in the exhibition as well. So
Thanks, Linzee. I gotta turn off your spotlight. Oh, there it is. Okay. Oh, goodness, so many technical aspects to this. But it's really been wonderful that all of these contributors to our exhibit have agreed to join us for these meetings, because we know that people are not traveling right now and that it's hard to get to see us in person. So we're just really grateful that we've been able to show this exhibit virtually in so many ways. And so I'm going to turn things over now to, let's start with Teddy, just out of pure happenstance. Teddy, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself as a quilter, how you got into quilting, and the kind of things that you love in relationship to quilting.
Oh, well, this is just an hour, isn't it? My daughter was little in 1973 or 4. I decided to make a quilt. Had not a clue what I was doing, but I did know how to sew because I was, just a poor Southern kid. So if I wanted to wear anything, I was going to sew it. Made a quilt, made another quilt, broke, single parent, go to Goodwill on dollar days, 10-cent days. I'm sorry, 10-cent days. They had a Goodwill table. And I just buy up all these clothes and wash them and tear them up and keep the buttons. And I just sewed. And by the late 80s, I finally helped start a guild, took my first class, learned I was doing everything wrong, and of course wanted to do it right. I was in a guild. I wanted to do the right thing. Man, I was so crappy. I can't sew. Triangles hate me. Diamonds hate me. Match seams hate me. And
Bonnie's laughing her head off.
I almost quit. And one time I thought, you know what? I don't really care about that stuff. And so then I started making really weird things and off balance and off kilter and all. And I just was rocking and rolling after that. Was a certified AQS certified appraiser for about 25 years, appraised thousands of quilts, and retired from that about 3 years ago. Oh, let me tell you how I got into string quilting, because you need to know that for this. About 3 years ago, when I retired from appraising, thought I was just going to stay home for a while. And I'm telling you, after a couple of years, I had had enough of it. And it's like, I wanted to dress up. I wanted to get in the car and go somewhere. I wanted to stand on stage and talk to people and be silly. And I was just going nuts here at the house. And well, I put myself on Facebook, got a job within 5 minutes, but everybody wanted classes. And I'd not done classes because I had done lectures and appraisals. Now they wanted lectures and classes. So I thought up 3 or 4 little classes. And I just busted my butt making the samples and handouts and supply lists and all that stuff. And I put it on my website and I thought, oh, that's not near enough. You need to stick something else on there so you look like a real teacher. So just on a whim, honey, I threw up these string piece classes. Well, don't y'all know that in all this time, that's all I've taught. Those other classes, I have not done one of those other classes. All I've done is string piecing. Oh, I did do the remembrance tree class one time, but only because the guild had already had all the other string piece classes. So I backed into this. It was just like backing off of a cliff by accident. And that's how I got into string piecing anyway. That's my string story.
What an interesting story.
I'm still dumbfounded by it because I have to tell you the truth.
Oh,
I think you don't really need it.
well, did I get you? Is Kate home this morning?
I'm sorry. What?
No, that's okay. Keep going.
Oh, that was it. That's how I got into all this. And but I do love string quilts because I love multi-fabric quilts. And if I am in an exhibit or a gallery and I see a beautiful red and white or a beautiful blue and white, I'll think, oh, that's nice. And I keep on going. But if I see a quilt with multi-fabrics, no, whoa, Nelly, I have put on brakes. I'm going to go look at that thing. So I really, really like quilts that give me a lot to look at and a lot to absorb. And of course, string quilts do that.
Well, and we've heard that time and time again, Teddy, in relationship to this exhibit. This is really an exhibit for fabric lovers and those of you who are kind of textile-aholics. This is the one, and it's fun. I've actually heard some people say, oh, I know, I have that fabric somewhere in my stash. Or, like that's insane to me. I'm just a brand new newbie quilter. But to think that you can recognize a pattern or a fabric that you have somewhere in your stash,
Oh,
I mean, you all just really love your fabric. And I get it. I'm catching the bug. I really am.
the thing I wanted to say quickly, Megan, that I think one of the things about fabric and string piece quilts is you can have some pretty ugly fabric in your string piece quilts. And it turns out beautifully because it's combined with so many fabrics, other fabrics too.
Yeah. Well, and Bonnie, I think you kind of have a saying for that, for ugly fabrics, right?
I do. If it's still ugly, you just haven't cut it small enough.
Right. So before we move on to Bonnie, I just want to point out, in case you missed it earlier, that the quilt over my right shoulder that I'm pointing at right now is the one that is Teddy's, and it's called Easy Access. And in a little bit later, I will pull up a closer picture of it, and Teddy can actually tell us a little bit more about this particular quilt and the 4 others that she has contributed to this exhibit as well. But let's hear a little bit from Bonnie. Same kind of thing, Bonnie. We just want to hear your story and kind of how you got into the quilting biz and what it is that draws you to quilting, really.
I'm really not sure where to begin with this, but I would probably take it all the way back to high school home ec classes. I loved anything home ec, and that started in junior high and then went through high school. And by my senior year, I had all the credits that I needed to graduate, but I still had a semester left to go. So I took an advanced home ec class, and one of the little 3-week segments, I think, was on quilting. And it was the kind where you draw on graph paper and then cut out cardboard templates and then cut leaving a 1/4 inch, and you've drawn your seam line and your cutting line and your everything. So this was 1980. So it was pre-rotary cutter. But going off to college, I wanted a quilt for my dorm bed, and all I had at hand was a stack of old blue jeans. And so I started making a crazy quilt out of these big, heavy denim pieces and just sewed them together, randoms, all scissors, no rotary cutters. And then I needed to square them down to some certain size, right? I mean, because these pieces were, and so I grabbed my favorite album, my Elton John, Madman Across the Water, drew around the album cover with a Sharpie and cut it out with scissors. So those were my blocks. And I did get the blocks sewn together, but probably with 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, probably not real straight. It never got quilted, but it did go to college with me. And then after getting married, I started noticing that there were quilting magazines in the grocery store. And if that magazine entered the confines of my grocery cart, it became part of the grocery budget. So I didn't have to, account for this. And so my stash started to grow from there. Also, I did children's musical theater and made costumes and stuff. So I had a stash when I got married. And there was a tiny little quilt shop in this little town of Prosser, Washington, where we lived when we were first married. There weren't even fat quarters yet. But I read, as I was a young 20-year-old new married gal, that she who dies with the most fabric wins. And I thought, well, shoot, I'm only 20 something. All those other ladies, they're like nearly over the hill. So I can win this. I can win this. And the thing that happens with any project, you'll find that no matter what you're making, every project leaves strings. You just have to start setting them aside, build your variety while you're working on other things. And then pretty soon the strings start to breed themselves and you have more fun using up these little bits rather than going to new fabric yardage. So I fell in love with string quilts early on in my quilting life. Started out sewing them on muslin foundations because that was what was done. Found that to be really heavy and bulky and twisty and lumpy and didn't always want to lay flat. So I moved on to phone book pages and was happy with that. And string quilting has just, I don't know, I have done string quilting, gosh, at least for the past 30 years. And there are so many ideas floating around out there. if you have any design that has a large square or, you know, a rectangle of any size, or a half square triangle, or an equilateral triangle, it's much more fun to build the fabric out of strings and then cut that out versus cutting it out of just, you know, one piece of fabric. What fun is that? As I've been quilting now, gosh, Dave and I will celebrate our 40th anniversary in August. So we're talking many years of stash. The stash volume never goes away. It starts out as yardage. And then as you make a project, the pieces just get smaller and smaller and smaller. And now I am surrounded happily by tubs of strings separated into color families and some left for rainbow, just in case. But if you were to put me on a desert island with a sewing machine, you know, it could be a treadle machine, that's fine, no electricity, no problem. Endless supply of phone book pages and bins of strings. I could sew string quilts till the day I die and never make the same thing twice. That's how versatile they are. I love looking through antique malls. Gosh, I miss antique malls. COVID needs to go away because I miss antique malls. I love finding just the 1940s housewife, farm wife string quilt with the newspaper still on the back, and she's doing the best that she can. And this is the fabric that she has, and she can't run out to the store and buy anything that matches. Those are the ones that just call to me. And the blocks can be square, they can be rectangular, they can be hexagon, they can be triangles, they can be long, strippy, the full length of the quilt. I love them for all the variety that's in them. And I love to see and think about, okay, was this fabric an apron? Was it a dress, a blouse, a man's shirt? Was it curtains? Where did she get this fabric? And I think there's just a lot of stories inside each string quilt that, you know, only the string quilt knows what really happened.
And Lindsay, I've heard you say something recently about one of the things you enjoy about making string quilts is kind of reminiscing back through those fabrics and what their previous life has been as a fabric, right?
Yes, very much. I think that's always so fun that you can look back and remember, oh, this was a quilt for Amy. This was a quilt for Maggie's baby. This, you know, that kind of thing is very fun, I think, about string quilts. I really enjoy that. I wanted to say one quick thing, which
Absolutely.
Bonnie reminded me of that I said last week, but I realized I didn't say. Bonnie was saying you have strings from everything. But one of the things I think I really learned is that you have a lot of strings when you are making garments. You're left with long, thin pieces. If you put your pattern on the fold or you put your pattern on the straight of grain, and these long, thin pieces, I mentioned last week or last time that my mom passed away and I was cleaning out her sewing room and she had carefully saved all these bundles of scraps, and I opened them up and many of them were these long, thin pieces because she was a garment sewer. And so I think this was also a way that people were able to use those pieces. And I think Teddy will talk about that when she talks about her quilt that's over your shoulder. But I think that's another reason that string piecing was so popular. And then often the pieces were too thin to use for a standard pattern too. So
before we go any further, I'm just going to take a quick pause and do a couple more housekeeping things. Many of you have already used the chat window, which is wonderful. If, as we're going here, you have something that you want to add to the conversation, or a question that you want to ask, or something that you want Bonnie or Teddy or Lindsay to talk about, please pop that into the chat window. We'll do our best to keep an eye on that. And I've got a couple people helping me today. We are up to 49 participants. So it's a little hard to keep track of all of the chatting. We'll do our best. But I think now is a good time that we can kind of start going through the quilts in the exhibit. And so I'm going to do a screen share and pop over to here. And Teddy, we're going to look at your quilts first. And let me go into full screen here. Okay, so Teddy, do you see the kitty quilt?
I do.
Okay, we would love for you to tell us the story of this because it's kind of a personal story for you.
Well, it is in a lot of ways. And I'm going to have to be very careful about what I say. This started, my mother had 5 sisters. There were five girls in the family, and there's only one left. My Aunt Kitty, who is 92 now. But a few years ago, she had sat at home and made these little string pieced squares on fabric, and they're hand pieced on the top. Like they almost look like they're appliqued, but she hand pieced them to muslin. And she said, well, I'll probably never finish these. She gave them to me, not expecting me to do anything with them. And one time I decided to play with them. So I took them out, and they were all kinds of sizes. And it looked like a 4.5-inch cut would square most of them up, and I could get enough for a quilt. So that's what I did. And looked around for a setting I liked, and I really liked this double setting. And I just used old fabrics that I had around from the 80s, but I really, really like it. It's almost got like the color of opals. But when I went, actually it's an old bed sheet on the outside edges is an old bed sheet. Listen, I am not a purist. I am not a fiber bigot. I just use anything my sewing machine will plow through. So anyway, when I had that for years, and when I started to do the string quilt lectures, I thought, well, I better go ahead and get some of these quilted. Had this one quilted. I had another top that I had made in the 80s, a Jacob's fan, middle 80s, one of the first things I made at a quilt shop, you know, in a class. So I took both of these to this quilter, and she said she had a pantograph of cats. And I said, that's perfect for my Aunt Kitty. Let's just do the little pantograph of cats. And for the other one, for the Jacob's fan, I just wanted a panto, just mattress pad. I mean, I didn't want to use the stupid thing. We were just going to put it in the cupboard. So I sent her everything. Well, when I got it back from the quilter, there was a bill for $521, all custom quilting, feathers all over the other quilt, custom all over this one, and the backs had been switched. I was so sick. I could not even look at them. I mean, I could not even look at them. I was so sick. And I just paid her money, and I threw them in a cupboard. They'd been there for years. It took me years to where I could even get these out and put a binding on them. So anyway, that's the story about Kitty Plays with Strings. And it turned out really, really well, I thought, for what it started out, some really ugly 80s fabrics. And that's what I said, you need, from now on, honey, when you have a long arm, make sure that you've got it in writing.
Right.
It's in writing what you are going to do and what they're going to do. So, and unfortunately, that friend and that lady and I are not friends anymore.
I'm going to butt in here, but I love this quilt. It reminds me of Liberty of London from where I sit here on my screen. You know how those Liberty prints are kind of florally and dainty, and the colors are just fabulous.
Yeah, it was surprisingly successful. I was surprised at how good it looked when I was done. And I tried really, really hard to find 4 that would sort of make the matched X in each little square. And yeah, I was real tickled with it. And one of these days I'll give it to one of her kids. I'll give it to one of her children. So.
Can I say something too?
Absolutely.
I think that one of the things that's really nice about this quilt is the consistency of those red centers. I think that, you know, and the way you use the sashing also, but it really provides a consistent place for, you know, there's a lot going on here. And I think that's wonderful. Yeah, so it's a beautiful quilt.
I was pleased with the way it turned out, surprised at how well it turned out actually, but yeah, I agree. The little spots of hot pink are, yeah.
Now, I'll just take a moment to interject. This quilt is actually a part of our bed turning display. And one of the unique features of the Iowa Quilt Museum, actually 2 things. We have this mezzanine level in our building. So it's kind of a floor between the floors. And the coolest thing I think about the mezzanine is that you can be up there and get kind of a bird's eye view of the gallery, which is something that we don't often experience. So that's one of my favorite parts about this building. And on that mezzanine, we have this beautiful walnut antique bed that's on loan to us from our local historical museum. And so we always have a bed turning display. our guests put on the white gloves, and with the help of a docent or a volunteer, they can turn through those quilts. And they love to be able to see the back and get up close with the quilting. And so this is one where people are really getting to see the backing of the quilt, even though evidently it's not the one that was intended for it.
Not a long shot.
And they're getting a really close look at that, that quilting that you paid so dearly for, Teddy.
Oh, and let me tell you, the other quilt that she had done all the elaborate quilting on, she did it because she was hoping I would put it in our local big quilt show. And, you know, she'd get the credit on my ticket. And I thought, honey, I told her, I said, no way I'm going to put that thing in a show with that back on the back. No.
Oh, goodness.
I still haven't put a binding on that one. I can't even look at it.
Oh, shoot.
It's been there for years.
So now I also love the story behind this one, which is called Corde Rouge, or Red Strings.
Yeah.
Tell us about this one, Teddy.
This, I hardly ever go on Pinterest, but I was putzing around Pinterest one day and saw something like this and stopped me dead in my tracks. And I could not get enough of that thing. And I looked and looked and looked, and I thought, I can figure out how to do that. So it took me a long time because I'd work on a few blocks and then I'd do a few, and it took me maybe a year just putzing here and there and yonder. So then I put it on Facebook, and everybody says, oh, you know, that's Karen Griska's quilt. And I thought, oh, no, I didn't know, because, you know, on Pinterest, they never give credit for anything. So I Googled Karen Griska and found out that was her quilt named Fandango. I went right on and paid and downloaded my little pattern fee so I wouldn't feel like I had stolen it from her, and put her name on the label. So that was, you know, I thought I had done what I was going to do to, you know, to give her credit where credit was due. And then just drew a blank. We started putting it in shows and people wanted to see it. And then they wanted me to teach it. Well, I don't know Karen. So I wrote her, I emailed her, and I told her who I was, and here's my website, and this is what I do. And I said, I have people who want me to teach this. And I said, if you want me to go away and never say your name again, I will respect that. If you want me to teach this, then I will give you the download fee for every student, and you know, you'll get full credit, blah, blah, blah. And she said, sure, you know, I don't care. So I did that. And the first time I taught it, and I sent her the download fees for the students through PayPal, and she sent me a thank you note. I think she was so surprised that I had really done that. And I've taught it 3 or 4 times, and I always count up my students and I send her the money, which, you know, I would want somebody to do that for me. But it's just the prettiest stinking quilt on the planet. I have never got tired of it. I love the red. I love the bajillions of strings. I love the basket weave. And that is one that it just tickles me every time I look at it. That is a pretty quilt. And thank you, Karen Griska. So that's that.
So my favorite part about that story, Teddy, is that it reminds me that quilters are wonderful people, which we all know and appreciate. And they're very generous, caring people. But I think that, you know, that has happened really recently because of technology and social media. But that kind of thing, and quilt historians, you know, pop in here and help me out. But that kind of thing has been happening forever, which is why we have quilt patterns that are the exact same and have different names. You know, if you go back to Barbara Brackman's encyclopedia of pieced quilt patterns, this pattern popped up here by this name and it popped up here by this name, because industrious and clever quilters saw something and figured out how to make it themselves, long before we had patterns that we could pass around on the internet. So cool. All right, Teddy, let's keep cruising through your quilts. Oh yes, okay. So here is the one that's over my shoulder, and it's titled Easy Access. And Teddy, you must have named it this, which I think is hilarious. So tell us why this quilt is labeled Easy Access.
Yes. Many years ago in Paducah, I hadn't been certified as an appraiser long. It was early 90s. and I was shopping and I'd found this sampler quilt from this famous dealer back then named Sandra Mitchell, who has now passed away. But I had bought this beautiful sampler quilt top from Sandra Mitchell. One of the other appraisers saw that and she says, "Oh my God, I'm researching that pattern. Please, 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 please let me have that." And so I succumbed and I let her have it. And she gave me this top as a thank you present. And I have showed this in Quilt Guild meetings for years. And one time she says, "Well, it makes you wonder how thankful she was, doesn't it?" Because it's really kind of ugly. But
It is so not ugly.
It's pajama factory cutaways, and they're seersucker. And a lot of I thought it was all men's pajamas for a while. And then I saw like a size 12 or 14 or something on the labels. So it was obviously some women's too. But what was so funny to me when I was working with it, the labels are still on there. And some of the labels say easy on, easy off. And so that's why I named it Easy Access. So get your pants down if you need to.
So I'm still in the child rearing stage of my life, and I'm guessing that those were children's pajamas, right? Easy on, easy off for your children. But if you translate that to adult pajamas, I just think it's even funnier.
Listen, I am so blushing. I can't tell you, my face is red.
So depending on what you want, you can either tell the G-rated story that those are children's pajamas, or the slightly less G-rated version, which I think is lovely.
We'll clean it up. Yeah, those were kids' pajamas.
I'm just going to interject here, Teddy, that you said, someone thought it was ugly, but Roderick Kirikoff, who's contributed 10 quilts to the exhibition and who has that amazing book, Unconventional and Unexpected, which is one of my favorite books of all time, quilt books. He loves this quilt. He thought this quilt was just amazing.
Rod would love my whole collection because that's all I go for. The weird, the wonky, the oddball, the one that makes you wonder what in the world was she drinking or smoking. And those are the ones that really appeal to me. The ones that I want to know the maker. Who was the woman and what was her thought process? And that's the stuff I collect right there. The unconventional.
You can tell by the time she got to that one edge, she had run out of what she was using as background kite shapes. She's like, well, the stripes are just going to keep going on. I love it. I just love it. And they weren't making art, but they're so artistic.
Yeah.
It looks so much better in the picture than it does in person. I'm amazed at how well it photographs. It really does look nice. Yeah, I can see why Rod would like it.
But the fun thing in person is that you can see those little labels. I just love that about it.
Isn't that the coolest thing? Yeah. And that was only a top for years and years and gosh, 25 years at least. It was just a top. And when I started doing all this teaching and lecturing on string quilts, I realized some of these needed a little more stability and that they would show better as quilts than they do as quilt tops. So I did some very, very moderate machine quilting and thin cotton batting and just whipped some of these up together. So there you go, right there.
So I just popped over and took this picture so you can see the sucker texture on the fabrics. And then here's one of the tags, Liberty, size 8, easy to get on or off. There you go. There's your easy access pajama quilt.
Yeah.
All right. Now I'm going to go back to my other screen share. And we've got 2 more of Teddy's quilts to talk about. This one is String of Diamonds.
Not yet.
There we go.
Is it there now?
Yeah.
Isn't that? I love that. I just love that quilt. It's God only knows where I got it. I cannot remember. I've had it so long. And again, it was just a top. And there are several 30s, 40s tops like this one that have that soft feed sacky sort of where they all mush together, that nice watercolor look.
Mm-hmm.
And they were all so out of square. I mean, they were almost like parallelograms. And I remember when I went to put a binding on this one and that little tiny border, I think at the very top right corner, I might have cut off as many as 8 or 9 inches that it was off square and then, just angled down to the bottom. And I did that on several of these. It was just astounding how not poorly made, because they're holding together. I mean, I make poor. So, but anyway, they were just really, really off square, and I had to square them up and make them much smaller to put the binding on. But these look to me like flags for some reason, like almost like the Tibetan prayer flags that you see flying everywhere. And I'm sorry, I can't remember where I got this, but I do love it. And I think that binding that I put on, I mean, the tiny, tiny little border I put on is also very vintage fabric. And
So I'll
that's
use this as my entree to pull out my soapbox for just a second and remind everyone who is currently making quilts, put a stinking label on the back of them.
yes, Lordy.
Because those of us who encounter historic quilts, you know, we really, really, really wish we knew the stories. And, you know, don't convince yourself, don't listen to that inner voice that tells you, oh, nobody's going to want to know about my quilts in 30, 40, or 50 years. Yes, they will. They absolutely will want to know who made it and where and when. So label those puppies as you're making them. Teddy, Sujata is wondering if these diamonds were foundation pieced. Do you know that?
You know, they almost would have had to have been, but I don't remember picking any paper out of this one particularly. That's a good question. I really don't know. I really can't remember. It was not on a muslin foundation because the seam allowances were all exposed, but I don't remember picking papers out. So it almost had to be, though. And you know, the magic of string piecing, and I tell people that have seen my quilts know I have absolutely no rules. I already realized I can't follow them, so I just threw them all away. And one thing when I teach, I do try to say one thing that I would follow if I had to follow a rule is following grain line. Because if you don't follow your grain line, you're going to fight and wrestle, and that sucker is going to win. And the good thing about string piecing, it matters not what your grain line is, because that foundation is going to hold that bad boy down till you can sew it. And then you win. You win. So yeah, most likely foundation pieced, but I can't remember. I am so sorry.
Is there a close-up of this one? Do you have a close-up for this one?
Well, I can zoom in a little bit before the quality starts to go.
Yeah, to pixelate, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. The yellows just make me so happy. I just love yellows in it.
Oh, those fabrics. Don't you just want to eat them with a spoon?
Yeah. Stripes and flats and prints, oh my. Yeah, that's beautiful.
And it's like Bonnie said, they're never ugly. And when I teach this, I tell people this is where you go to get rid of your uglies, your holiday stuff, your juveniles, pre-printed panels that had the ducks on them. You remember?
Oh, they strip real well. They strip up good. You
can slice anything up, slice it up, put it in this, and they all like each other. They play well together. Yeah, string quilts they just answer just all kinds of problems. I love them.
So in answer to your, can we see the quilts a little bit closer? I'll just take this moment to let everyone know these Tuesday meetings are intentionally very conversational, and we look at the quilts, but we really want to hear what Bonnie and Linzee and Teddy have to say. If you're really interested in seeing the quilts up closer, and you're not within distance of actually coming to visit the museum, which would obviously be the best, we have put together a virtual gallery walk that is just the quilts and the descriptions that Linzee wrote for the quilts, and it was narrated over top of them. And so that gives you an overall shot like you see here, and then it zooms in and pans through each quilt. And just like admission to the museum, which is $6, you can purchase admission to the virtual gallery walk, and I email that video to you. So that's a good option if you really want to see all of the quilts in the exhibit up close, in addition to the ones that we're going to see today. And before we leave today, I will put all of that information in the chat. And of course, you can find it on our website as well. So one more from Teddy, and then Bonnie, we'll switch over and take a look at your quilts. This is
Oh, that's a new one made by
It
Teddy
is.
Pruett, her own self. Um, and as a matter of fact, I have a pattern for this one. And when I was doing handouts and class samples and all, I thought, you know, this would be a nice one to try to sell. And your students would enjoy having a real honest to God pattern as opposed to just a handout. So I made patterns of this one for my classes. And it's simply a rectangular one in 2 colorways, black and gold, scraps. Oh my gosh, scraps, scraps, scraps. And I'm just amazed at how pretty it turned out. But because, and I have this one in a pink and brown colorway, the black and gold colorway, and completely just whatever I pick up out of this basket is what's going on there colorway. And when you do a string quilt with a square block, you can do that square block any way you want, and you have untold variations. This is a rectangular block. The rectangular block doesn't behave like the square one does. It only does certain things, but it does certain things that are just really, really pretty. So this is just a rectangular block, and I think I have a consistent center through all of them, which is not like me because I like scraps so much. But yeah, that's the story behind Black Hills Gold, and a vintage yellow floral vintage border. I like it. It's pretty.
I think that the light colored and the white in those brown or dark squares just really lifts it too, I think, and gives it a lot of movement. I think that's really, was that a fabric that had the mix of those dark colors and the light colors? Is that how those wound up in there, Teddy?
Which, help me.
The dark rectangles, that they're not all dark. I just want, yes, so they're fabrics that mix dark and light together.
Oh yeah. Oh
and
yeah.
I think that
Big
just,
light in.
yeah, I think that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Anything that was basically black or dark gray went in as the black. And when it had a lot, like you said, when it had a lot of whites or a lot of movement in it, it just really keeps it from being dead. It's really nice and sparkly.
Yes, I agree.
And you know, there's a thing about scrap quilting that's almost serendipitous. You can plan and plan and plan and over plan and plan your way right out of pretty. And sometimes when you throw caution to the wind and you let the fabrics just land where they may, they just do magic on their own. And I think this is a real good example of that, because it does have a nice a sparkle and a movement and a nice texture. And I think if you try to do too matchy, you're going to lose that lanyap. Did y'all know I knew a big word like that?
And Teddy mentioned that she does have a pattern for this one, and we have copies of that pattern for sale in our gift shop, which you can obviously visit in person when we're open, or we do have an online gift shop as well. I think we have some lumber being delivered to the museum right now, so I'm just kind of keeping an eye on things, but we're doing a somewhat major renovation in the upstairs of our museum right now. But I took a break and came down here to hang out with you guys instead. All right, so let's switch over to Bonnie's. This is one of Bonnie's quilts, Serpentine Webb. And this picture, I'm not sure why I never got this picture turned to the vertical orientation, but it probably works better on your screens this way anyway. So
it's kind of cool this way. I may have to make one this way. You know, I follow Roderick on Instagram, Roderick Kirchhoff, and yesterday, I believe it was, he posted another one of his fabulous quilts that had a yellow background, and he wanted to point out that look how cool all these various shades of yellow work together. Why did she use so many various shades of yellow? Well, I can tell you with this one, and I don't know if you can tell from the screen, but there's about 3 or 4 different yellows going on in the background. You run out of one and you try to find another one close enough to the dye lot to finish the quilt. but it's actually adds some interest, just like Teddy was saying. Sometimes if we overplan, where you're using just one constant fabric to be the background of something, or whatever it is, it reads as flat. And if you can change that up a little bit, in this case, it was because I did run out of yellow and tried to find something close so that I could finish the quilt. The various shades of that yellow really add some depth and some interest. And you may not have noticed it right off the bat, but I bet now that you've seen it, you can't unsee it. So this is Serpentine Webb. It's the cover quilt from my book, String Frenzy. The string parts, I used everything. I used neutrals for some sparkle. I used all kinds of fabric, from holiday fabrics to 1930s to Civil War to 1980s to whatever was in the scrap basket as the part that became the spider web. And then I just used the solid yellow as my background. We also had an interesting conversation on folks in the 1980s and 90s who thought they were being helpful when they said you should never use too much yellow in a quilt. And I disagree. I love what the yellow does for this. It started out as a traditional spiderweb quilt, and I had it laid out on the floor, and my dog Sadie, who is gone now, she's been gone a couple of years, happened to walk across the blocks and block surfing and shifted one row of blocks or one column. And I, instead of seeing those nice spiderwebby circles, I saw a serpentine start to appear. So I played with that. And what you've got, if you can look at every other row, you'll see that every other row starts with just a half a block and ends with a half a block. And that's what gives it this really interesting serpentine effect, almost a zigzag. And I had so much fun making this one that it could have gone all the way to king size. But since I was traveling with these quilts and they had to be shipped for photography, this one is just about a twin size, which is just about right. Sometimes I like to do string quilts with whatever the basket holds, from light to dark, all the color families. We call this rainbow or kitchen sink. And then sometimes I like to play within certain color families to do certain quilts. So in my storing of my strings and the making of the strings, I have one bucket that has rainbow everything. And then here comes Straits of Mackinac kind of sliding into screen view here. This one I used shades of aqua to teal, and there's some almost pushing navy purple in there, just for a little bit. But I will also sort my strings by color family. So if you were to take a quick look under my long arm machine, there are clear tubs with strings by color. So there's a yellow bucket, a pink bucket, a red bucket, a brown bucket, and so forth. And they have endless variety in them. As I am cutting for one project, maybe I'm putting a red border on this one quilt that I'm finishing up, and there's just a little bit of fabric left over, or maybe it's the cut that I'm making to true up the edge of that fabric before cutting the borders, I will move my ruler over at least an inch so that I can save that whole piece in my string bucket versus just throwing away, an 1/8 of an inch that I'm just clearing the fabric up with. Just as Teddy also said, anything that is ugly, I just cut it smaller. So my strings are anywhere from, I'd say about 3/4 of an inch up to 2 inches. Anything over 2 inches, it's too wide. So I'll end up cutting that in half again to make it narrower. And by this time you cut these strings down, you can't tell what the print on the fabric is. So all of those rules about you can't put 1930s fabrics with Civil War fabric, you should always stay within the same genre, or you should always stay with the same designer, or you should always stay, with what's current. It all goes out the window because your fabric is just your paint at this point. So with Straits of Mackinac, I used string piecing in just 2 places. You can find the teepee shapes there that are in the star points. The colored spot in between the neutral star points is string pieced. And then I did neutral string piecing out in the border. Good, there's a nice close-up view for you. If you can see those little sashings, oh boy, those were a booger. I think the units finish at 2 inches. So the little sashing in between two of those teepees is going to measure like 2 by 4. So it's tiny. Those were actually 1.5-inch strips sewn side by side because you can't really get too many strings in a piece like that. What else do I love about this? I love mixing traditional patchwork elements like half square triangles or those long tall star points from Tri-Rex or square and a square units in with some string piecing elements. So we recognize those units and it kind of gives your eye a place to rest. But the string piecing was by far my most favorite part of making this quilt. String quilts also weigh a lot. When you look at the quilt on the front and you see how many pieces go into one of those triangle teepees that's behind the star points, imagine how much seam allowance is on the back side. So there's probably as much fabric in the seam allowances on the inside of the quilt as is showing on the outside. And this is why I tend to use a paper foundation. Phone book pages, they're getting harder to come by, but if you keep searching, you'll find phone books. They're worth their weight in gold. Other things that I use for foundations, those financial prospectuses that come in the mail quarterly, they're about the right weight of paper. They're thin, they're crisp, and I give it one more job before it hits the trash. Or you can get doodle pads at the Dollar Tree. You can get newsprint on the roll, or you can buy newsprint by the ream that you can run through your printer if you were going to do regular paper piecing on a foundation. But Straits of Mackinac was designed from the colors of the water that I saw while teaching at the Grand Hotel Needle Art Seminar in Mackinac Island, Michigan. I was amazed at the clear aqua colors of the water. I always thought that I would just see that in the Caribbean, but it is just beautiful. It's one of my favorite places on earth. Okay. I'm talking a mile a minute. Anybody want to jump in?
You're doing great, Lindsay.
Okay.
Anytime you want to, but here is Emerald Isle, I believe. Did I get
Emerald
that?
City.
Emerald City, that's
Emerald
right.
City. So it has kind of a we're not in Kansas anymore theme to it. I fell in love with an antique quilt that had these giant blocks. And I scaled these so that the math would work nicely for me, which made these blocks like 24 inches. They're huge, huge blocks. And instead of cutting one square to be the corner square or one triangle to be the triangle that surrounds the center star in the blocks, I decided to string piece these and hit up that green bucket that has all of those green strings that I've been saving for a long time. And I tried with this one to be a little bit more discerning. Greens are harder for me to work with than blues. I don't know if it's the same with you, but I tried to stay more towards the blue, green, yellow, green, because there's kind of a gray green, almost army green, almost olive green side that's heading towards brown that sometimes just did not want to play with the brighter ones. So I covered about a bazillion foundations, made a gazillion and a half more half square triangles, and built this quilt in pretty much the same layout as the antique quilt, but the strings took center stage here. Another one of the things that I really, really love is mixing up my neutral backgrounds. And the neutrals might not be the first thing that you see, but they go from white to cream to sand and everywhere in between. And if you were to do a look up close, I bet you'll find some Millennium Y2K fabric with silver sparkles. You'll find holiday fabrics in cream and tan and maybe snowmen. There may be cow fabric that says moo. And I just really love shaking up the background of a quilt to be just as interesting as the front. And this one, other than finishing the sashings to the edge, I didn't bother to put borders on it. I didn't think that it really needed more than a strong binding at the edge.
Bonnie, I was going to say that I really like that about the Straits of Mackinac, the border on that, where you pieced all those fabrics that were, light colored, and you just would think, oh, it's just a border, but it adds so much to have it be so many different fabrics.
String quilts have so much texture too, and they draw your eye. Like when I'm looking at this one on the I can't even Emerald City, or on this one too. Do you guys see the overlapping circles in
Mhm.
this one?
Yeah.
If you took the little sashings out, if you can see how the little sashings go between those little sashings actually create more circles within the quilt. And if you remove the sashings, it's just not as fun. So it was worth doing. And those little sashings stop at the edge of the quilt and then carry the center theme from the in between the blocks out into the neutral border. So it almost looks like an appliqued or beaded edge.
Mhm.
It was
I'll
fun.
tell you what, little pieces do not scare you.
Oh no, they don't. I love them. Yeah.
So one question that just popped into the chat window is kind of a technical one. And when you're doing string piecing like this and with such small pieces, do you iron seams open or to one side?
Well, if you're sewing on a foundation, you can't press them open. They're going to go to one side as you sew. And I don't have a problem, just like Teddy said, as long as her machine can plow through it, because for most of the time when you're joining string pieced unit to string pieced unit, those seams are not going to align with each other. Sometimes I have to pin with seams that are going the same direction, and that's no different than the quilters in the 20s, 30s, 40s up to wherever when they were making string quilts. Once you get the paper foundation off, you can press some seams open if it's strategically helpful to you, but usually one direction is fine for me. I'm not much of a presser opener unless I have to.
Lindsay, do you have anything else that you want to, any other conversation topics you want to throw out to Bonnie or Teddy, or things you want to add?
I am curious, Bonnie, do you also collect quilts in addition to making them?
I did for quite a while, because along with the She Who Dies with the Most Fabric, it's she who has collected the most vintage quilts that she loves. I pretty much stopped that. I take photos of antique quilts everywhere I go. I love to do that and use them for inspiration, or I'll use them as the background on one of my quote of the day things that I do. But the accumulating of quilts, I'm out of room. Seriously, I'm out of room. And my sons are saying things like, Mom, when you go, we're just bringing in dumpsters, you know. So pretty much I've stopped purchasing the antique quilts. I love them. When I find them, I pet them, I hug them, I take photos of them, and then I let somebody else take that one home.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, I understand that. I said when I wrote my first book on feed sacks, my book on feed sacks, that I was not going to collect. I have a huge collection now, and I don't know, I'm running out of space, so I understand.
Yeah, the struggle is real because we want to save them all.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and we are not a collecting museum.
Alexa, turn it off.
Everything we display is on loan to us. And so, you know, we get that request a lot is, can you take my quilts? Can you give them a home? Because there are a lot of quilts that need homes. And, you know, next generation of the family isn't necessarily going to be that home. Lindsay, I want you to talk about yourself for just a few minutes, if you would please, because in addition to being a fantastic curator, you also have done some other things like fabric design and, excuse me, pattern design as well. And you're going to be the segue into, we're going to draw our raffle winner today. So tell us a little bit about you.
All right. Well, so I am a writer. I was a journalist. I was a writer and editor for the University of Iowa for a long time, 13 years. And during that time, I started freelancing, and it just one thing led to another. And after my kids were out of college and I wasn't paying for tuition anymore, I decided I would try and go out on my own, which I did. And I write for a lot of different quilt magazines and different places. And one of my clients is Moda Fabrics. I've written for them for about 10 years. And after I published my feed sack book, Cheryl, who just retired, the design director, came to me and said, would you be interested in doing a line of feed sack fabrics, which had never occurred to me before, honestly. I mean, I really didn't think that would happen to me. And so I said yes. And I'm actually working on my 5th line, but my 4th line will be out in the stores. Shipping is delayed, so it's probably going to be the end of the month. It's called Flowers for Freya. And there we go, Megan. I should have brought, I have some quilts downstairs that I've been binding. I should have brought them up to show. I don't have them now. I have some blocks here. I'll be doing a quilt along on Instagram with Susan Aki, who's Yard Girl. These are blocks for the quilt along we're doing. My name on Instagram is Seams Right, SEAMSWRITE, like right about sewing. So we'll be doing that. But anyway, Megan has a giveaway.
We do. And so we have, Moda has graciously donated us a fat quarter bundle of Linzee's new line, Fabrics for Freya. And as she mentioned, you can't even purchase them yet. And we kind of introduced this raffle a couple of weeks ago and sold tickets. And today I'm going to draw the winner. And Bonnie heard me talking about this at the very beginning of the program and said that she's going to give a bonus prize to the winner today. And excuse me, she's going to throw in a couple of her books, and she's got 2 string piecing books, and one is called String Frenzy, and that's the newest one. Is that correct?
Yes, that's the newest one.
And the first one was String Fling. Oh, I can never, okay. So we've got String Fling and String Frenzy, and these fabrics, which would make string quilts or other beautiful things. And I'm gonna throw in one of Teddy's Black Hills Gold patterns as well. So whoever gets the bundle today is really gonna make out like a bandit. And here we go. I'm pulling up my big jar of raffle tickets. And I'm really hoping that whoever is the winner is on our call today, because that would just be totally cool. Okay, I'm digging way to the bottom, and I've come up with this name, and it is Janice Lee. I think Janice Lee. If Janice happens to be on here today, she's jumping up and down right now. I'm scrolling through for anybody named Janice. We got a lot of Janets. There's 2 Janices on the call today. If one of them is you, Janice Lee, whose whose phone number ends in 4749, you should turn on your video and we'll congratulate you. If you happened to not win the bundle, you can't buy the fabrics yet, although I do think that Moda is pre-selling them. You can buy Bonnie's 2 books in our online gift shop, in addition to some other fabulous Bonnie Hunter merchandise with Bonnie Hunter quilts on it. We've got little pouches, we've got bags, we've got pencils, we've got playing cards. So check out our online store for that. You can also purchase Teddy's pattern there for the Black Hills Gold. And I'm just gonna pop this into the chat window right now. IowaQuiltMuseum.org is our main website. And from there, you can find a link to our online store. You can also find a link to sign up for our email list. And if you sign up for our email list, your email is ours. We never share it with anybody else, but we will let you know about upcoming events like the rest of the programs here on our virtual Iowa Quiltscape series, exhibit changes, and all sorts of other wonderful things happening at the Iowa Quilt Museum. You can also find a link to make a monetary donation to the Iowa Quilt Museum. I mentioned we are a privately held nonprofit organization, and so we rely heavily on the generosity of people who share our mission, which is to promote appreciation of the American quilt. So if you're valuing these programs and you would like to make a donation, we will happily accept that. You can also purchase the online virtual gallery walk if you'd like to have that virtual admission that we discussed earlier. And you can find past programs. All of our programs are recorded and I put them up on our YouTube page, and you can find links to those on our website. So one more time, it's IowaQuiltMuseum.org, and you can find everything you need there. I've got a few hands that are raised. So Lorraine, and I'm gonna see if I can I assume that your hand is raised because you wanted to kind of ask or add something. So if that's you and you want to go ahead and unmute yourself, you're welcome to do that. Otherwise, Bonnie, Teddy, did you have any other closing things that you wanted to say before we kind of part ways this morning?
I do. I want to thank Linzee for the honor of being included in this amazing exhibit. And I've had some other things in the museum before.
Yeah.
I just know a lot of people, you know, Facebook gets around and somebody says, does anybody have this or that? So I've been lucky enough to have other things there, and it's always exciting. And I'm so happy, Bonnie, to finally say, oh yes, I know Bonnie.
Oh,
Friends.
it's really nice to meet everybody.
Yes, it is. And thank Megan for all of her hard work and your technological goings on here, as well as all your hard work with the museum. And I thank you. I thank you. I thank you. I'm just real tickled. Appreciate being here.
Well, thank you, Teddy. We are happy to have you contributing to this exhibit again. We're always happy to have your quilts and your expertise. And it's, you know, wonderful. I communicate through email with a lot of people, but it's just so lovely to get to talk to you. And one of the upsides of this whole COVID business is the fact that we've turned virtual. Teddy and I may have never had the opportunity to meet face to face, except through this virtual medium. So thanks for that. Bonnie, I'll let you say any closing things that you want to, but also quick, tell us about the quilt that's behind you. We never talked about that.
Oh, okay. Well, this is the Jing Quilt that's behind me, which Xing is how you spell it. It's not Xing or crossing, but I sewed this quilt just before I took a group to China on tour. And that was probably the first and only last time I'll ever be to China at this rate. But I made the centers of the blocks out of crumbs. You know, the difference between crumbs and strings is just some are short, small and chunky, and some are long and skinny. And crumb quilts are right up there with string quilts in my book. I alternated the star blocks with the string blocks, and I just had a blast making this. I don't plan my quilts out by computer before I make them. I make a handful of blocks. Do I like them? Yes, make some more. Let the quilt grow as it wants to in whatever direction it wants to go. And this is where it ended, also with no borders on this quilt. And the pattern for this one is found in String Frenzy, as well as the other three that you are showing there at the museum. So it's just a lot of fun. Like I said, if I was only given one genre that I could make my quilts with, if you're limited to just this one thing, string quilts provide endless opportunity and endless variety, and you never get bored. There is no reason to ever get bored while you're making a string quilt. In closing, I guess I'd like to thank Linzee for getting a hold of me and asking to see my quilts. And it's been really fun working with the both of you through this whole thing. This is probably the most connected I have felt in months and months, even virtually. So I'm grateful for that. And I want everybody who's out there, there are thousands of string quilting tutorials free out there on the web. Just hit up Pinterest, hit up whatever, and just give it a try. If you're sewing on a paper foundation, I would suggest everybody put their stitch length down. Make those stitches small. It's going to make that paper easier to remove if you're using a paper foundation. And remember, there are no ugly blocks in string quilting. You may end up with a pot holder, but you will have learned something. But I bet it'll make you addicted.
Excellent. Linzee, I just put your Instagram handle in the chat. Bonnie, your Facebook community is called Quiltville, right?
Yeah, Quiltville. If they put Quiltville in the search bar, they'll find both my Facebook page and my group.
And Teddy, I don't have your website right to hand. Can you tell us what that is? And I'll type it in.
TeddyPruett.com.
TeddyPruett.com.
And even if you spell it wrong, it'll usually pull it up.
That's the beauty of the internet these days. Yeah. So this is how you can touch in with Linzee or Bonnie or Teddy. One last time, the Iowa Quilt Museum. I try to capitalize it. so it's a little bit easier to read. IowaQuiltMuseum.org. You can always find my contact information there, and I'm happy to help you touch base with these fine women if you need to. Thank you so much to everyone who joined us today, especially to Bonnie and Teddy for taking time to visit with us about their quilts, to Lindsay for coordinating this whole beautiful exhibit that we are all enjoying. Please remember to join our email list if you would like to learn about more programs coming up, and we look forward to seeing you all in the future. Have a lovely Tuesday afternoon, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Thank
Thank
you.
Bye-bye.